Alright, so this is 1970s Carter. We did one of his domestic things. Now we're going to look at his foreign mistakes. Okay? Now, first off, some of these aren't necessarily foreign, but I just needed a good point. In 1977, Jimmy Carter famously is going to announce amnesty, or a forgiveness, if you will, of draft dodgers of Vietnam. As I've told you before when I talked about the draft dodgers of Vietnam, we have a future vice president, we have a future president in this that avoided the draft, and without Jimmy Carter doing this, they would have never been able to run for those elections. Okay? So thereby, that's frowned upon in Carter's life. People go, well, they shouldn't have been given amnesty or given forgiveness. And there's a lot of maybe hatred towards Carter for that. Now, the same year in 1977, Jimmy Carter struck a deal with Panama. Basically, he said, we're going to give the control of Panama Canal back to Panama. And this is going to happen in the year 1999, about a 22-year span. This really angered people because a lot of money is generated through the Panama Canal, and we had used this for many years. However, Carter felt in the issue of human rights, if it's in their country, they need to control it. So both of these kind of political mistakes happened in 1977, right after he's taken office. Okay. Now, one thing he does do that is very, very productive is he will agree to mediate between two countries that have just gotten out of a war in the early 70s, the Yom Kippur War, by bringing them to the United States, and it will, as you can see in the video here, win him a Nobel Peace Prize. These are called the Camp David Accords. He invites Benem Mecham from Israel and Anwar Sadat of Egypt to the United States to mediate peace. And then why is it such a big deal? It's the first time that any Arab country has agreed to peace with Israel. And so for that reason, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize. But specifically, it was Egypt. President Clinton tries to make a Camp David Accords 2. In fact, Clinton and Carter's administrations are very, very linked in what they tried to do. So this is probably a really good, this isn't a failure, but this is really, really good. Looks good on Carter. And for this reason, he kind of has this mentality today of going and helping world situations to become better. Okay? Now, all of this is going good until Carter goes on TV and gives what we call the crisis of confidence speech. That's what he officially named it. But slangly, they called it the malaise speech. In that he's trying to, what he wanted to get people to understand is, we can't get out of this inflation and everything because you don't have confidence in the American system, in the president, etc., due to the credibility gap in Vietnam. The way people took it is as malaise. Now, malaise is kind of an informal laying of blame. So they basically saw it as him saying, hey, everything sucks, and it's your fault. So when he tries to run for re-election against Reagan, he will lose because people say, well, Carter's blaming us, and we don't want this. So this malaise speech we'll go through a lot in class, so I'm just bringing it up in the context of it here. Now, one country we begin to start having problems with in the late 70s is Iran. Okay? Now, Iran, much like Iraq, had been part of the Persian Empire, part of the Ottoman Empire, and had been fairly new countries since after World War I. Right about the early 70s, we helped and supported a guy known as the Shah. A Shah is a king, and so Iran's king, if you will, was U.S.-backed, and everything was going like this. This all radically changes because, much like Afghanistan, there is the movement for an Islamic fundamentalist government. All foreigners out, and everything done this. The man pushing this, not physically but verbally through his speeches, will be known as the Ayatollah, or High Revered One, Khomeini. So, the Ayatollah gives all these anti-U.S. rhetoric or words and they basically run the Shah out, and the Ayatollah now has full control. With this now in power, he begins to keep giving anti-U.S. rhetoric, and they turn on the American embassy. And famously, they stormed the American embassy, these students who said, we want to stage a sit-in, a protest, etc. When it's all said and done, they will take hostages of the American embassy. And they hold the hostages for almost a year. And this is very chaotic. It doesn't look all that great. And ultimately, Carter will try a mission to rescue them. It fails miserably. This is also where we get the term, and you've seen it in tons of movies, I refuse to negotiate with terrorists. And ultimately, the Ayatollah said, we're done talking to you. We get a new president, we'll talk to him, but we're not negotiating with Carter. This essentially kind of kills his presidency, the Iran hostage crisis. And it lasts for many days. None of the hostages were actually killed. However, they were treated in a way of someone who's a hostage. Someone's being kept against their will. Now, the way that this ultimately ended is once Reagan is elected, the hostage crisis ends a few months later, and there was some other little things which we'll talk about when we get to Reagan on how this ended, and it's very, very interesting, okay? Now, also, as we said, in 1979, the Soviet Union is having problems with their own in Afghanistan, and we famously boycotted the 1980 Olympics. So we're not sending our people there because of what happened with Afghanistan not recognizing human rights. So all of this stuff kind of mixed together is really what's going to signal the end of the Carter administration. So the 70s, guys, was not a good time to be a president. We had Nixon, who lied and tried to cover up Watergate, resigned. We have Ford and Carter, who are both one-and-done presidents. And we need a president who's going to take power and who's going to take control. And in the 1980s, it's going to be Ronald Reagan. Now, I'm not going to proceed to the 1980s here. However, I'm going to make a series of videos on civil rights movement. A couple of them will be review, and most of them will be kind of modern, but I really like the way that this is set up, and I hope you do as well. I hope you get a lot about this, all right? But that is it for Carter.